Hello, everyone, and welcome. We're so glad that you are with us today for this really special program. My name is Allison Cornish. My pronouns are she and her, and I live in Western Massachusetts on the lands long stewarded by the Nipmucs. I serve as the Chaplaincy Initiative Coordinator at the BTS Center. And it's on behalf of the BTS Center that we are so glad that Aura, Scott, Michael, and Nicole and I are able to bring this program to you today. I'm going to turn it over for a moment to the program director for the BTS Center, Nicole Duroff.
Hello, friends. On behalf of the BTS Center's staff team and Board of Trustees, I bring you greetings this day. The BTS Center is the organizational successor to Bangor Theological Seminary, and we are focused on spiritual leadership for a climate-changed world. We engage with pastors, spiritual directors, preachers, lay leaders, and chaplains. And we host continuing education and vocational formation programs in the form of book studies, retreats, and public conversations like this one. We're grateful for all our partner organizations in this work, including and perhaps especially the Chaplaincy Innovation Lab. Michael.
Thank you all so much for hosting this, for welcoming everyone here. The lab is so delighted to be part of this work with you. And I've always said that for the longest time, when people came to the lab with questions or interest about all things ecological, I had to tell them there's really nothing I can give you because it doesn't exist yet. And so it's been so wonderful to see the BTS Center begin this initiative and start to be the there that I can send people to when they have these questions. So thank you very much for having me, for having the lab, and I look forward to our conversation toward the end.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you, Nicole. And I want to say just a few more words about the BTS Center's work on chaplaincy, climate change, and Earth. The BTS Center's particular interest in chaplains who have already so many skills that you employ, assisting individuals and communities in accepting and making difficult choices and adapting to change. You already are doing a lot of work on understanding trauma. You offer rituals and practices of loss and grief and healing. You are in the midst of meaning making and tending to loss and grief and brokenness and cultivating and maintaining hope and resilience and so much more. This is the work that you are already doing, and this is the work that a climate-changed world is hungry for and will need so much more. We want to open this time and this space in the most holy and sacred way we can, and that means that we'd love to hear from you. So this is an invitation to open the chat and to say hello in any language you choose. Just open the chat and type in hello in any language so that we can all hear, in quotes, one another's voices in the different languages that we have. Good morning, hello, hi, hola, greetings, hey there, good morning. Most people seem to be in the morning mood right now. Greetings from Atlanta, peace, greetings friends. So much love and joy in those greetings. Some of you have already started this, but where are you zooming in from today? Let's hear where you are. We already heard from Georgia, but perhaps there's California. We've got a few other places coming through. Wilson, North Carolina, Chicago, North Carolina, Buffalo, New York, Kentucky, Indiana, Texas, Santa Cruz, Connecticut, Oklahoma City, Indianapolis, and more and more and more. Wonderful. Now let's move a little bit deeper in our getting to know each other in the community. What is one gratitude you are carrying with you this day? What is one gratitude that you are carrying with you this day? Life. Yeah, thank you. Strawberries, connection, health. Spring has finally arrived. Gorgeous weather. Phenomena. Backyards. Your mom. Purpose. Community. Oh, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. And to connect us with our topic today, what's one grief you carry with you this day? What is one grief you carry with you this day? Loss of parents, Gaza and the genocide, plastics in the ocean, people of Palestine, grief for the loss of a mother and sick grandparents, and people who do not honor trees, and oppression, and mercury, and abuse. It's amazing that these griefs are right there, just below the surface. We're all carrying them. Thank you for your honesty. Thank you for your sharing. And keep them coming. As I turn this over to Michael.
Thank you for giving me a moment to find the unmute button. So I'm so grateful to welcome our guests this morning, or this afternoon rather. It's been wonderful to get to know them over the past couple of weeks, and I know that we're really going to learn a lot, and they're going to give us a lot to think about in our time together here in the next hour. So I'll give the brief version of their biographies, and of course you can find them online on the event webpage. So Rabbi Ora Nikinkiner is the founder of Exploring Apocalypse, a non-denominational climate change chaplaincy practice, where she holds space for her clients to explore the truth of the moment and helps individuals experiencing climate anxiety and despair access ease and purpose as they engage with the climate crisis. Rabbi Ora lectures nationally on climate chaplaincy and leads trauma-informed workshops and support groups addressing the spiritual challenges and invitations of climate change. And Rabbi Ora, I'm very grateful, especially for your wisdom this morning, because after a word started getting out about this event, I started getting emails. What is ecological grief? What is climate grief? And I told people, go to the website, come to the event, you'll find out. So thank you very much for being with us. Reverend Scott Hardinieri is partner, dad, spiritual director, pastor, and sojourner. He works with people and communities that love one another, their neighbors, and creation as the director and minister of Bethany Congregations, a ministry of the Bethany Fellows, and co-minister of Green Chalice of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. He is co-founder of Echo Grief Circles, supports a climate-informed spiritual direction group, and generally seeks to build stories of resilience through intentional gratitude, honored grief, wise discernment, and embodied action. So Ora, Scott, thank you so much for being with us this morning, and I will turn it to you.
Thank you so much, Michael. Thank you for this introduction. I'm so glad to be here with all of you. And I want to say a thank you to the BTS Center and to the Chaplaincy Innovation Lab for creating space for these really important conversations to be happening. So very glad to be here with all of you. Going to attempt to share my screen now. All right, give me a thumbs up if you see my screen. All right, thank you. All right, so as Michael said, I am the founder of Exploring Apocalypse, which is a non-denominational climate change chaplaincy practice, which means I work with folks from a variety of faith traditions and backgrounds. I also work with folks who are agnostic and atheist. And okay, so my practice is called Exploring Apocalypse. When you hear the word apocalypse, you are probably thinking, end of the world, profound destruction. But the original meaning of apocalypse was simply to uncover or to reveal. So in my chaplaincy practice, I create a space for my clients to explore both senses of the word, to name all that they're losing and all that they fear will be. Climate change is uncovering in the world and in them in order to recover some agency and really to figure out how to live with an open heart in these transformative times. So that's my present, but now I want to take you with me back into the past to 2008 and to my first experience with chaplaincy in a maximum security state penitentiary in Louisiana. I was providing occasional spiritual care to wrongfully incarcerated men, and I had no training, so not great for me and also not great for them. And what this meant was that long after I would leave, I'd still be thinking about the men who were stuck and suffering behind these bars. A couple years later, I started rabbinical school and I did formal training as a chaplain. And I began to learn how to take my full self, including my attention, with me when I left work for the day. So I did this through small rituals like paying attention to the wildflowers on my drive home from the nursing home, and making sure to squat down and push my hands into the grass in my front yard after a day volunteering in jail. Rituals like taking off my jacket and badge as soon as I left the hospitals where I did CPE. Rituals like drinking in the smell of lilacs after visiting a congregant who was on hospice. So I began to really consciously build ritual into my leave takings. And this was only possible because in most traditional chaplaincy settings, the chaplain enters into the physical, where emotional, where existential, where moral suffering is contained, and provides spiritual care in that place, and then leaves at the end of the day. So most settings where conventional chaplaincy takes place are inherently boundaried. The time that we spend working as chaplains is boundaried. And we learn as chaplains how to establish and maintain appropriate professional and emotional boundaries for the sake of our patients and ourselves. Okay, so what about in climate change chaplaincy? With climate chaplaincy, the conventional boundaries in spiritual care are changing because our normal understandings of time and place are being transformed. And this is because of the nature of climate change itself. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now so you can see not just my face, but many dear faces. And I'm gonna speak a little slower now to try to counteract some of the ways our nervous systems can get dysregulated when we talk about and when we hear about climate change. Okay, so climate change is changing the ways we experience time and space. Climate change is not place-bound, and it doesn't, although it doesn't impact all peoples or all geographies in the same way, none of us can remove ourselves from it. We can't remove ourselves from it physically. We can't remove ourselves from it emotionally or morally or spiritually. We don't exist in a space that is separate from climate change, and none of us get to leave. And climate change also isn't time-bound. It's ongoing. It has been happening in our past. it exists in our present, and it's predictive about our future. And it's also transforming how we encounter that past, that present, and that future. So we will all be living in and through transformation for the rest of our lives. And if, as you're hearing me say this, you're feeling overwhelmed, that is entirely reasonable, entirely understandable, entirely normal. And I want to remind you that as chaplains, this is exactly what we have been trained to do. We have been trained to help people navigate transformation. Spiritual care at its core is accompaniment through transformation. And you are in exactly the right place and at exactly the right time and in exactly the right position to be thinking about how you want to offer spiritual care in a transforming world. So I'm going to pause there. I'll be speaking a few minutes from now more on how climate change is transforming our relationship to time and grief. But first, I'm going to turn things over to my very wise co-presenter, Reverend Scott Hardin-Neary.
Thank you very much. Very grateful to be a part of this and to already learn so much. Aura, thank you for sharing that. And I'm grateful to be able to hear some more. And thank you to the BTS Center and the Chaplaincy Innovation Lab, and for family and friends that are here, as well as my CPE supervisor, Mary Davis, and just grateful for all the ways that I've been able to connect with you all and today, this particular topic. I'm going to share my screen as well. I've have a few images and some things to share regarding this. And let's see if I can get this going. Is it working? Can you see anything? Great. I'm going to start with a little bit about my climate conversion experience. And so I had the opportunity to spend time in Monteverde, Costa Rica, in the cloud forest there, and with my family. And in the midst of my time serving and participating, I learned a lot about how my neighborhood was growing.
Scott, I just want to say right now we have a black screen, so you may just need to advance to your next slide.
All right. Oh, this is so exciting. Something is not working. All right. Let's see. I'm going to try again. Sorry, y'all.
Okay.
This is awesome.
No problem.
All right. Still black screen.
Yeah.
All right. Let's do this.
Nicole is on backup in case you need it.
That is so great. Okay. I'm going to try one more time, and then we'll do the backup plan. What does that
There
look
you go. Perfect.
All right. Awesome. So this is Monteverde. You didn't see this before, right? So this is the Cloud Forest Monteverde. My family and I spent time there, and in the midst of it, we were expanding our idea of neighborhood and loving our neighbors as ourselves, as one of the spiritual traditions of my faith tradition, the Christianity. And Mark 12, we're reminded to love our neighbors. And in the midst of this time in Monteverde, I had an opportunity to grow my neighborhood, not only outside of the country and my community, but also outside the human species. Began to understand a little bit more about how interconnected the world is. Oh, gracious. All right. And some of these neighbors looked like birds and sloths and insects. And I began to understand a little bit more about the diversity within the ecosystem and the interconnectedness of all these things. And in the midst of all that, I also heard over and over again about how the rains were shifting, how the dry season was drier, how wells were drying up in the neighborhoods around our house. We heard this from baristas and coffee growers, from scientists and Quakers and Catholics. All sorts of people were telling us throughout our time there about the changing climate. It became clear to me climate was showing up in a new way for my experience and for my life. I was recognizing that this issue was threatening all the people of Monteverde, all the creatures of Monteverde, and indeed all the people of the world. So began to understand a new call, vocational invitation for me. And I got fired up and was excited and began to explore how I might do this work. And I went back to my denomination and asked, how can I help? What's going on? And my denomination at that time had very little happening with climate change. And so I returned back to Monteverde disappointed, and went to a scientist that was there and was going to leave the ministry and go into sustainability or biology or some sort of policy, and was talking to this wise professor. And eventually he shared that that I should go ahead and act from where I had a community, from where I already had training, that the urgency was there, but I might want to go ahead and grow where I'd been planted. And so I began to re-engage faith communities. And when I returned to the United States, in Western North Carolina, was part of a organization that was working with interfaith groups to provide climate solutions. So these are some of the examples: planting trees with one of the synagogues nearby, the blessing of the solar panels, all the ways that we were engaging in creation care and care for the earth. And we were doing this quickly and with urgency. And in the midst of all that, recognized that we could not outrun the movement of grief. Grief in the midst of this climate work continued to show up. I was excited to be able to do different workshops and opportunities to share ideas and solutions. And I was a part of this youth conference for a summer experience with hundreds of young people, and was really excited. I had this giant Jenga set at the booth, and we played icebreaker games. I even had snacks for them. I had done a lot of right things. And in the midst of that, I hadn't been paying attention to my own experience of climate, what it was doing to my heart, to my mind, and to my body. And so one of the rituals that I offered to the young people was to explore my complicity and to offer a confession to the young people in the midst of this time. So as I was doing the ritual and offering a confession, I was overwhelmed with tears. And I was surprised that climate showed up again in the room. As you can imagine, the young people were surprised and confused, and I took away from that time. And of course, as you know in your training, that the session stopped being about them and my presence with them and started being about me. And so it was ineffective for the rest of the time. Luckily, it was towards the end, but I had a lot to learn about integrating the spiritual aspects of climate change, not just doing the tactical, strategic engagement. So I'm very grateful to have that experience, and very sorry for those few young people that probably forgot it as soon as they left. In the midst of that, I began to learn a little bit about my taste of grief around climate change and around eco-anxiety. And my vision of it and my experience of it, my fear of grief, is that I might be distethered or untethered from reality, from the ability to engage with life if I face the grief too closely. It was like a vast emptiness that I was very afraid of. But I did the work, and I began to engage in practices with a few other people around the area that, as we were doing the work, we heard over and over again that the spiritual care elements alongside the composting and river cleanups were showing up. So I met a hospital chaplain in town, and she said it's showing up in the hospital. I met another pastor, and she said it's showing up in her church and in her Bible studies, that people are describing not being able to sleep at night and being concerned for their grandchildren. And they're counseling people whether or not to have children because of the ways that the climate is unfolding. And so 5 of us got together and we began to dream and listen more deeply about how we might support one another and our community in a holistic approach. Solutions are important, but without the element of expressing grief and owning the truth, we're missing a lot about what's happening. So we turn to we have a lot of wise people that are sharing their ideas with us. Joanna Macy is one. I invite you to check that out if you haven't. Francis Weller is the other, where they connect our grief with our love. And this is back to that passage in scripture. The idea of loving my neighbor allows me to grieve deeply for how it's shifting. So part of what happened around the kitchen table with these 5 pastors and chaplains is we dreamed up a way of engaging people in an eco-grief circle. So we had 7 weeks where we explored a variety of aspects of this work together. And one of the aspects is the 5 gates of grief from Francis Weller. And this is a very different image that I had. It really enabled me to be able to feel more grounded and brave when I was facing grief. And he has 5 different elements of sorrow and grief that you can look at. I'll just go through this, and you can pause this if you have the recording to check out all the 5 gates of grief. But we do some rituals and practices around this, and it allowed me personally to be able to touch in on what's happening while I'm talking about solar panels or when I'm having pastoral care conversations. I'm touching the places that I am holding grief in my own life and in my body, and really grateful for this process. In the midst of all of this work, we recognize not only as a group, but in the different practices that I've shared, or I appreciate you sharing some of the practices that you have, or sharing some of your practices as well. You all have done some of them. So we did a grief and gratitude practice already this afternoon, which is a prayer of examine in the Christian tradition, but it's you can do it in a variety of ways, honoring both that there is delight and wonder in the world, as well as grief and suffering. And so both of those. Tending to our bodies in the midst of conversations, whether it's in our ministry context or just around, noticing when we feel most alive and when we feel constricted, where we're feeling fear or anxiety. So tending to our bodies. And then the last is this sense of remembering in nature. And I have done this in a variety of contexts, and I can imagine you bringing shells or some sort of token from nature into a hospital room or into some sort of space, and inviting someone to select one of them and to hold it as they remember a time when they experienced awe or wonder in nature. And what tends to happen is people have a lot of them, but as they're holding this piece of nature, they might begin to share stories of wonder and delight. And this uncovers love. And there is a way that we might be able to talk about climate change, but really it's reconnecting people to the source and to our wonder in the midst of nature. I've shared several ways that climate has shown up for me, and in beautiful ways, and in very challenging ways, and unexpected ways, as well as expected ways. And I wonder, in your ministry context, as you're thinking about in the future around climate, if you have had climate show up for you in your spaces or in your experience, even your own body, or from a symptom or cause of climate change. And if you do, would you share in the chat just a little bit about how you've experienced climate showing up in your ministry context? If I can find it, I'm going to share a couple of those. You can just use a word or phrase, or give us some hints. the land sinking around. Using art and experiences. A daughter sharing, do you ever feel like you know the trees? Hearing about anger and afraid to tap in. Wondering if children will see snow again in your area. Having mutual tears is happening more often. In Seattle, people dying of heat exposure. Please continue to offer your wisdom and your experiences in the chat. This is helpful for us to get a sense of it and for you to be able to recall those moments. Stop sharing, and grateful for you to continue to share those, and Aura will continue to share her wisdom and insights with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott, for that richness and for evoking so many rich reflections from this group. So as we continue to speak to our lived experience of climate change and climate grief, I am going to take us into a little bit of a deeper dive on grief and how climate change is shifting our relationship to time, specifically with concepts of loss and grief and mourning. So is everyone able to see my screen again? Okay, great. All right, so we are going to start with some quick definitions. So loss is the absence or end of a relationship. Grief is the aggregation of emotions that follow an experience of loss or a state that we're in after we've suffered a loss. And mourning is the period during which a person formally expresses grief. So essentially, grief that can be received and recognized by others. So if we are to represent this visually and very simplistically, let's say that this black line is a portion of a person's life. This green line represents the presence of a beloved other, their relationship. And this orange line represents the death of the beloved, so represents the loss. The period after loss, grief, has been, mapped for us by many psychiatrists and psychologists and grief scholars, with the most well-known framework being an expansion on Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's 5 stages of grief. Of course, we know that grief is rarely clean and that it can really change from one moment to the next and one season to the next. So it tends to look more like this. But regardless of whether we see grief as a clean arc or as a very messy, very long spaghetti, there's a linearity that's implied here. So the relationship, the loss, the season of grief, that the griever eventually moves out of. So there's this sense that grief is resolvable. And when it comes to climate change, we can map this linear experience of loss and grief onto situations where there's a concrete, one-time, and legible loss because of climate change, like losing one's home in a fire, flood, or losing a loved one or a community during or as a result of natural disaster. But what about climate change-related losses that don't fit into this model? What about when grief extends indefinitely into the future or when it reshapes the past? We can see this in situations of non-finite loss. So this concept originally developed by grief scholars Elizabeth Bruce and Cynthia Schultz around the year 2000. The defining feature in non-finite loss is the ongoing presence of the loss, meaning that the loss and the grief are continuous. And in this graphic below, I've tried to represent this by these yellow arrows extending indefinitely into the future. With non-finite loss, the triggering event can be linked to a particular moment in time, but the experience of the loss and the grief, the attendant grief, will typically stay with the individual for the rest of their life. So in climate chaplaincy, we might see this in an individual who's decided not to have biological children because of climate change. The absence of the child is an absence that this person will likely continue to feel and potentially to grieve for the rest of their life, as they mark, could have been moments and anniversaries and grieve losses of imagined identity and the loss of assumptive futures, the loss of possibilities for nurturance and for care. And we can also observe non-finite loss in an individual who feels that their government has betrayed them and their fellow citizens by not taking enough action on climate change. So in a case like this, we can, of course, see how grief and loss of trust can extend into the foreseeable future, but it can also really cause a reframing of the past, causing the individual to ask questions like, what else was I missing? In what other ways has the government or corporations tried to hide other truths? Is there more that I could have done? And so their understanding of the past, and really in many ways their past self, is being reconsidered and reconfigured. Another type of climate change related loss that also challenges conventional understandings of grief is ambiguous loss. So ambiguous loss is a concept that was developed by the therapist Pauline Boss in the 1970s. And it describes felt losses where there's either uncertainty about the exact state of the loss or when something is partly lost and partly not. So in climate chaplaincy, this can show up in an individual who's noticed that on their walks in the woods near their house, they're hearing less and less birdsong. And they're pained by that absence, and they're worried about what it says about the changing habitat. One of the particular challenges of climate change related ambiguous loss is that a loss that's partial, a loss that's incomplete, can be experienced as predictive of future and greater and more definite losses. So decrease in birdsong can thrust the person's mind forward to be imagining the time when the last bird has sung its final song. And Panu Pikala, in his really extraordinarily article that came out in the last few months on ecological sorrow, I can't recommend it highly enough, he discusses how not knowing when the loss will become final produces anxiety. And so we have anticipatory anxiety, which is a very common climate emotion, often being experienced alongside or in tandem with ambiguous loss. We can also see ambiguous loss and anticipatory anxiety at play when providing spiritual care for a person whose livelihood is being impacted by climate change and who's wondering, when they should give up and try to find other ways to support their family. So questions that they might be holding that are simultaneously extraordinarily practical and deeply existential are, how do I know when to give up? And when do I start grieving? And the transformed and transforming griefs of climate change, of course, they don't just impact the person experiencing the loss. It also impacts how their loved ones and their communities can meet and hold them in their grief. So I'm just going to go through this quickly. For grief to translate to mourning, it needs to be legible by others. It needs to be recognizable. The person who's in grief, their relationships or their communities must have the capacity to support them through their grief. And those who are supporting the mourner often want to feel that that support is actionable and that it's finite, so that it's not going to, that they're not going to be grieving forever. And a lot of climate grief, because of the absence of some of these factors, can really become disenfranchised grief or chronic sorrow or what's called complicated grief, which can really be an umbrella term for many other observed types of grief. Okay, so it's a lot of theory. What can we do? What do we do as chaplains to meet this extraordinary moment? A basic truth about grief and loss, about us as human beings, is that for our suffering to be tolerable, we need it to be comprehensible, we need it to be relational, and we need it to be meaningful. Okay, so let's look at these needs and some spiritual care interventions that we can do as chaplains. We need our suffering to be comprehensible, meaning we need to be able to understand our losses and our grief. So as chaplains, we can work with individuals to help them name and contextualize and normalize the complexity of griefs and other co-occurring climate emotions. And we can help shift their expectations of loss and grief away from a linear and unidirectional and time-bounded experience. Relational, we need our suffering to be recognized and held by others. So we can invite the individuals we're attending to reflect on their resources and relationship, and know that traditional communities or containers for supporting their grief may not be present and may need to be sought out or created. And we can also work with folks to create rituals, new rituals, to hold loss and move through grief. And finally, we need to be able to make sense of our suffering, to learn from it and let it move us and grow us. So that means we could invite folks to reflect on changes in their sense of self and their relationship to the more than human world, reflect on their relationships to individuals and human systems, and reflect, of course, on their relationship to spirituality or God or the sacred. All right, so my final slide. There is no map for this, beloved. I've brought the lantern. I've brought time. So Thomas Addig says that grief is a process of relearning the world. There is no map. What are you unlearning in this time? But we are each bringing a lantern. What knowing are you being invited into? What new ways of knowing are emerging in you? Okay, thank you. Turning it back to Scott.
Thank you so much. I wonder, as you are listening and watching and participating in this, what is coming up for you in the midst of this? I invite you to take a moment, a couple of breaths, notice your body, and invite you to put in the chat, if you're able or interested, where you are feeling connected so far in the past 45 minutes or so. What is standing out for you? What are you noticing about yourself? And what is drawing you in or attracting you about what you've heard? And feel free to put that in the chat, and we'll read through a couple of them, and then we'll still have some time for questions and answers a bit later on. connecting with a genuine heart of sadness and tenderness, feeling connected to each of us together. Lindsay shared that wants to go outside and lie down in the grass. Experiencing a mix of lament and hope. Feeling seen and heard. Seeing a map emerge. Is that lantern? Thank you. Noticing tears in the office. I invite you to keep these coming as a way both to allow yourself to be present in this moment and tend to what is happening in the midst of your own life. And so then we can share this together to read through, experience this in a new way, in a varied way. So we move into our next part of the program. Thank you.
Thank you so much, both of you, for this deep, deep dive and such a thoughtful, meaningful way of expressing. I'm seeing so many comments about validation and people feeling seen and heard by what it is that you've said. I want to commend both of you for the ways in which you've drawn connections between tending to grief around climate and the ways in which chaplains already do a lot of this grief tending and meaning making. And we had one question about wondering how what you've just spoken about connects with cancer grief. That would be one way of looking at it, but are there other ways that you've experienced as a chaplain that you're seeing real parallels with the way in which we're doing this work around climate? Toss it to either one of you.
So I'll jump in and I'll say that my CPE residency was in oncology chaplaincy and palliative care chaplaincy. And the first time that I encountered that image of the very messy spaghetti when I was trying to put together resources for patients and families who had just experienced a diagnosis of cancer. And I was attempting to bring a map to them and to say, you know, in our conventional sense of grief, when a person is anticipating or experiencing their own mortality, you know, you may be tempted to think that you need to hit these various emotions in your experience, but actually it's going to likely be tremendously messy. And, you know, an invitation to prepare yourself to feel an incredibly broad range of spiritual, intellectual, emotional, existential challenges. And so, you know, what I try to remind myself of on days when I feel inadequate and not up to the task of this work is that we're all bringing experiences of witnessing an other deeply in a way that communicates care and does create or lend a little bit of light to the darkness. And so if you are a chaplain who works in a hospital, or if you are a chaplain who works in a nursing home or prison, or a movement chaplain or a disaster chaplain, army chaplain, you know, all of us are coming with such richness of experience, and you are equipped to bring that experience to this transformative moment.
And just to add on to that, I would say that specifically, I haven't experienced this, but I would say that most of the congregations and people that I do connect with would say that the climate grief is a low-lying experience for all, like that is connected to all the things. So whether it's cancer or other diseases or divorce or some other loss, and that's why like the 5 gates of sorrow are not specific to climate change. Like climate change is just one element of that. But we are finding that paying attention in the midst of the kind of ministry care, the spiritual care that you're doing, will allow you to be ready for the conversation if it comes up, or to be ready to offer practices or questions to help people as they grapple with this.
Thanks so much. I think we have time for maybe one more question. Michael, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, and Aura, I just wanted to sort of follow up something you just said. You mentioned bringing the richness of experience that our community here today has. I want to go to the other end of that spectrum and say, for those who maybe don't have richness of experience in spiritual care, I get a lot of inquiries from students who, people who are either in divinity school, theological school now, or are thinking about it, or whatever. They don't even know where to get started. So I would like to ask, what is your advice for those who are not experienced chaplains, but they feel called to this work for some reason, in some way? How can they begin to get their arms around something this big without that richness of experience? I know that's a huge question, and we're not going to answer it all right now, but I think that for those who are exploring this, just knowing where to start is an enormous help.
Yeah, thank you, Michael, for that really important question. And I just want to name my gratitude that this conversation in and of itself, and all the other conversations that BTS Center and the Chaplaincy Innovation Lab are holding, are itself building out a series of resources that folks have a chance to access and contribute to. So gratitude for that. And specifically to your question, Michael, I would advise these individuals to try to do, what I did when I was first investigating. Is there such a thing as climate chaplaincy and eco chaplaincy? And what could it look like? And as I was doing my own research into this field a number of years ago, what I was also doing, in addition to trying to get a handle on some of the theory or potential theory, was having practical lived experience, meaning conversations with friends, with colleagues, with members of my community. Tell me what you're feeling around climate change. Tell me what you're wrestling with, what you're struggling with. I mean, we all have the capacity to have conversations and to bring curiosity to what individuals are experiencing. So start there. Start by asking questions, listening, and potentially also sharing what you're going through.
This has just been so rich, and unfortunately, we need to wrap up right now. Many of you have asked, is there a recording? Yes, the recording will be available on both the Chaplaincy Innovation Lab's website and the BTS Center's website, as well as the other events that we have been able to do as part of this series. So we will have a follow-up email to all of you and let you know how to access that. And right now, I want to turn this over both to Nicole and then again to Michael to talk a little bit about upcoming events at both of our organizations.
Thank you, Allison. And yes, we would love to continue on this journey with you. Coming up next for the BTS Center, our spring event this year features climate scientist Katherine Hayhoe, author of Saving Us, along with musician Liz Fulmer and 3 conversationalists. It's our feature event for this season, and we hope you'll join us for a conversation about collective honesty and complicated hope. Lament with Earth is the BTS Center's seasonal worship-filled online gathering for lament in community. The BTS Center has partnered with liturgists and musicians The Many in crafting beautiful and powerful video productions that we gather around. Our summer Lament with Earth event will be on June 12th, and we'll be focusing on all creatures and living beings. If you want to shift from talking about ecological grief to engaging with it in community, we invite you to join us. And our convocation gathering, which is the BTS Center's annual legacy event. This year, our theme is Hope in Small Places, Becoming People of Refugia Faith. We'll be in person in Hallowell, Maine. If you happen to be in the Northeast and able to join us in person, we would love it. We also will be having an online companion track that will include some hosted live stream sessions as well as online exclusives with our presenters. So if being in person is not possible for you, we hope you'll consider our online companion track. And last but not least, this work is all falling under an emerging initiative for the BTS Center, our Climate Conscious Chaplains initiative. And we invite you to visit the webpage that Allison has put in the chat to understand the vision we're putting forward for this, to access resources like videos of previous events we've done like this one. And we're really interested in hearing from you. So you'll find on that page a survey and an interest form. We'd encourage you to spend a moment with either of those things. We look at all of them. We read all of them. So please, we invite you to engage with us. Michael.
Thank you so much. I just want to take the opportunity to mention 3 upcoming events that I think will probably be of interest to many of you here. Tomorrow at 3 p.m. Eastern, we will have a webinar under the title New Research on Unaffiliated Chaplains. And so this has to do specifically with chaplains who do not identify as religiously or spiritually affiliated, both the chaplains themselves and the people to whom they're providing care. So this comes out of some of the lab's recent research. So I encourage you to come to that. I'm going to put all 3 of these links in the chat right now. Next Thursday, we will have an event with a chaplain named Charlotte Kramer, who has a ministry serving those who are experiencing homelessness, as well as folks who are incarcerated at the county level out in California. And so we're going to have a wonderful conversation with her on what it means to provide spiritual care to those communities. And then finally, on June 13th, we'll have a webinar with a chaplain named Devin Moss. You may have read about him in the New York Times, but his story was about both his service as an atheist chaplain, serving an incarcerated person condemned to die who is also an atheist. And so the story really unfolds all of this. What does it mean to have a human spirit and to provide spiritual care in that setting, in this very it's a sensitive topic, but an unjust setting in very difficult circumstances. And so I really encourage you to join us for that on June 13th, also at 3 p.m. These are all free, and I look forward to seeing you there. Thank you all for the opportunity to talk about this today and for welcoming the lab.
And I'll just quickly finish up by giving my enormous gratitude to Rabbi Ora and Reverend Scott. Thank you so much for being with us, for bringing your wisdom, your insights, your tender times with us, and sharing them so generously. I've dropped in the chat the ways in which you can stay in touch with the BTS Center, with the Chaplaincy Innovation Lab, with Rabbi Ora, and with Reverend Scott. So thanks all for being with us. If you want to unmute, if you're still with us, and just say goodbye, we'd love to hear your voices on the departure, and it'll be on the recording too. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all for the space.
Bye. Thank you very much.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you. This was awesome.
Thank you.
Great.
Thanks, everybody.
So wonderful to see your faces, hear your voices, see your names. Bye, everyone.